Hi, and welcome to the Writer's Den. My name is Jane Waters Thomas, and today we're going to be speaking with a very interesting author. His name is Barry Altland. He is a writer, an author, a thought provoker. He teaches us the importance of volunteering and engaging volunteers and leaders. Welcome, Barry. I would like to talk a little bit about really just the very start. Like, you wake up one day and you go, wow, we need a product on the market, maybe in the form of a book or a conversation or a conference that engages people to the point of really caring more about their volunteers, and then maybe also building some leaders. How do you get to that place?
Yeah, Jane, it's a great question, and I wish it had happened overnight. The reality is that it happened over years of time. And in my corporate life, I was in learning and leadership development roles, driving initiatives for some major organizations. And at the same time, in my service life, I was volunteering in a lot of different capacities. Anything from professional associations to faith-based organizations in community and youth sports, and I'm the president of my HOA, so I'm just involved in a lot of different things. And I discovered in all of my different volunteer experiences that I was having this dichotomy of experiences. Some of my time was so enriching and fulfilling, other times not so much. And that's when my organizational development hat went on.
Right.
And I started to ponder, well, what makes the difference between these two vastly different experiences? And what it really came down to in my study was leadership. And over time, over these years of having these experiences, it kept tugging on my heart. And something kept telling me that, I think that you've got enough knowledge to share and some guidance that just may help leaders. So that's the genesis. That's where it came from. And the book is really designed as a simple guide to leaders to really help them to be able to engage the passion of their volunteers.
Now, your book, Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of Volunteers, really speaks to the importance of engagement, right in the title, and the engagement of not only putting them to work where you want them to be, but getting them to the place of really feeling empowered.
That's exactly it. And it really provides some guidance for leaders in organizations who are volunteer supported that may be a bit different than the way that they're accustomed to be thinking. Mm-hmm. And why I say different is through my travels and through many times to be able to share the learning messages of the book, I've discovered that there's a lot of aha moments that are happening for leaders, because it's so natural for us to want to, as we serve an organization that is out there in the community doing something good, we want to do what's best for the organization. And it's typical that our wiring guides us to do that. And the book suggests that we actually do something a little bit different than that, which is we actually serve the individual volunteer first, almost as if it's a priority list, that we place that individual volunteer just slightly ahead of all of these other really important priorities. And when we do so, we actually have an impassioned person who we find out what's stirring in their heart. We get them aligned to a role that feeds their passion, and ultimately everybody wins.
Absolutely. I've watched clips of some of your programs. I've been fortunate to be able to sit in on one of your conferences to hear some of the passion. Just in your speaking, you can clearly hear, even when you're speaking to an audience, about the content of your book, about the passion of engaging that volunteer, the importance of separating those two roles, that management role from that people role, as you've said. Talk a little bit about, from the book standpoint, how do we look at the volunteer when you run an organization, and how do you make that determination? Where do you think that line is where we go, oh, I probably should work on budget at 2 a.m. and take care of this volunteer right this moment?
Yeah, so let's take a step back from where your question leads us and acknowledge that most people who end up in a leadership role in a volunteer supported organization, they end up there by default, not necessarily by destiny. And what I mean by that is that typically somebody who gets involved just because they want to do something good. And then they end up what I call falling backwards into a role where they have influence over the experience of other volunteers. And by the virtue of their influence, they are a leader, even if they don't realize that they're a leader. So it dawned on me late in my game of my research and my writing why most leaders are not embracing these really simple yet possibly different principles of leadership. The reason why is because they don't even look in the mirror and realize that they're a leader.
Did you wake up just one day and go, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to write this because this has to happen?
Well, again, it was over time, but it was really about acknowledging that people that are in these influential roles, they need help. And I had something to give. I had something to offer. I picked up all of these beautiful golden nuggets through all of my 15 years of corporate experiences and being able to help develop leaders in the corporate world. And these principles that define effective leadership in corporate life, they work equally as well, maybe even more so in volunteer-supported organizations. But I just wasn't seeing it practiced enough. So that was what compelled me to step out of corporate life, and I've been doing this for nearly 2 years now, and to answer the call to my passion work.
So do you find that the readers of your book and that the participants in your conferences are typically leaders of organizations, or do you find leaders of volunteers seeking out these conferences and wanting to figure out more about what's happening? Which market are you leaning to, and then which market actually hits you?
Yeah, I wish that I could say that leaders in my for-profit world and leaders that I've been exposed to in my nonprofit and volunteer-supported world were dramatically different in many, many ways. The truth is they're not really that much different, in that most people in leadership roles, they tend to fall into two categories. Either they totally get it, or they're somewhere on their journey in wanting to get it. Some more so, some less so.
Right.
And for me, it's catching those people as they're in their leadership journey and being able to offer them guidance and really practical tips and things that they can put into practice every day to really help leadership come alive. I think that leadership is a learnable skill. It's not something that we're born with, and I know there's a lot of theories out there on that. That's where I stand, is that leadership is a very learnable skill. It's just a matter of taking those nuggets, that guidance, putting it into daily practice, and then watching the beautiful impact that it can have.
You know, from a conference or from a reader of a book, do you have any one or two stories that just stand out where you go, yeah, that was the target I was trying to make?
Yeah, actually, I have a friend who lives in Chicago, and he, from the very outset of my work, even before the book was finished, I'd done some workshops and some conferences where I've been able to share the key learning points that ended up in the book. And this was just a guy who embraced my work. He was what I call a disciple. He was somebody who really just sort of is like, I get this. We're not doing it right now, but I get it. And he had risen to the role of president in a professional association. In fact, it's the largest chapter in the entire country for this professional association. And he made a commitment during his presidential year that he was going to apply these basic principles of what it means to engage a volunteer. And the essence of that is stop trying to sell getting involved in your organization to people, and instead take what I call flipping the conversation, taking that approach where you just ask somebody, why are you here? What brings you to this place? What do you desire to get out of this? What are the things that you consider your gifts, your skills, your needs, your wants, your desires? And you flip the conversation around to make it be all about that individual. And as you gain those insights from that individual, then you help them to align with a role that meets those needs and feeds their passion. And when you do that, you got them hooked. And this guy, he took this basic principle. He worked on building that culture within his entire leadership team of 30 plus people, and then set them about with their membership of over 700 people, and began to see the fruits, began to see how their organization was growing organically just by taking this different approach to engaging their people.
You know, how exciting to, one, that it's a friend, and so you have a personal relationship there, and he can give you some great feedback about how your model project went into his workplace and really made a dynamic change. What do you think it is in general leadership that would have a difficult time embracing the concept of relational volunteer programming? What do you think that the difficulty would be in getting that person that's kind of hardcore to the numbers, to the policies, the procedures, the things that make us tick, and getting them from the 4 Ps, as you mentioned, over to the 1 P, which is the people that makes the difference? How do you capture that leader and get them to that place?
The battle cry for leaders in all facets of life is, I don't have enough time. And that's the one that I consistently hear is, wow, this sounds so good in theory, but how do you find the time to engage people one person at a time? Because there's no other alternative. People are engaged one person at a time, and that's just the way that it happens. I personally feel that that battle cry of not enough time may be an excuse for many people. It's real because we're all very busy, but we often tend to not prioritize the things that are really difficult, the things that really provide us challenge. The people stuff, it's kind of fuzzy and nebulous. It's not easy to do, but the fruits of the investment, that's really where it's at. So for me, I discovered that leaders, they'll say that they don't have enough time when really maybe they just don't feel comfortable or as comfortable as they could be in having those meaningful one-on-one conversations with people.
What do you do with that leader? So now we know that perhaps it's a character issue. Maybe this leader is brilliant, phenomenal at the administration of their organization. How does that leader get from there to engagement? Yeah,
so there's a couple different pieces. And there's no magic in this. So it's about learning how to do it. And the book provides a lot of really concrete examples and guidance of how you can begin to practice these really simple and basic leadership principles. And then it's about practicing them. It's about actually going out and doing it and feeling comfortable with your own missteps and your own errors along the way and really embracing them as learning opportunities. So that's the pathway, but here's the part that cannot be learned, is what's going on in here. A leader has to care. They have to want to make that transition from being just a manager of policies and processes and procedures to taking their focus and placing it squarely on their people.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things that just kind of strikes me in this conversation is that we're in a generation of reading. We read in snips everything, small text. We read Facebook, we read social medias, we read everything, is even our newspaper that we should all be touching and manipulating, in my opinion. We're reading it online. You know, we've taken the verbal, relational, the auditory communication out of our general day. And, you know, I would even have to say that I believe that leaders 50 years ago didn't have so much difficulty engaging because it just was not an option. It is a different thing standing in front of somebody, reading their facial expressions, and you know instantly whether they like it or they don't like it, or they're excited or they're not excited. What do you do there? You know, so we have a generation of folks that are leaders and brilliant leaders, might I add, that are of a technology that kind of puts the brakes on some of that relational stuff. How do you feel those leaders are going to get past that? Because it's almost a stopgap in the relationship building component that's necessary to engaging the head, the heart, the hands of a volunteer.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of credence, maybe sometimes too much credence, that's placed in the generational differences. Because my interaction with young people, and I've been blessed to have lots of opportunities to be able to work with young people, and I mean young people meaning even preteen, on through teenage years and college students and the millennial generation. And we tend to carry some preconceived notions, and at times they do bear out. They have some truth to them, in that there's comfort with technology, but not necessarily to the exclusion of human touch. and to those personal relationships. And I suggest that no matter one's generational affiliation, that the really basic principles of we just want somebody to care about us, and we want to feel like what we do has an impact and it makes a difference. That's not changed over time. I just think that's an essential part of humanity. And if we can continue to stay focused on that, no matter who we're working with, if that volunteer is 80, if they're 50, and 50 is a number that I'm staring at really, really soon.
It's a number.
Yeah, yeah, and
Right.
you know, or whether that person's 25 or even 15, that we have to embrace that we all care about that same thing, and it's that we just want to matter.
You know, I love your approach to that question. It's a question that I often ask in interview because technology is absolutely given such a rap for stopping a lot of communication. You know, when I ask that question, what I think I am alluding to, however, is the leaders that, and maybe this is a character issue. Let's go there for a second, right? So maybe that is their way of dealing with people in general, and that may not change. You know, I know that we have had in organizations that I've worked with in the past, leaders that are dynamic and brilliant, and the answer was to hire somebody who could do the heart component, because that was what they were just going to be good at, and it made a lot of sense to do that. You know, and so in thinking about the people or the leaders, I want to keep to that leaders title right there, because I think it's very important in thinking of the leaders that need to or maybe want to put this book to practice, who go, I'm just not going to do that. I personally am not going to be able to come to you, Barry, and tell you, I want to help you be the best volunteer. What do you say to that leader who's much better at texting or emailing than going, hey, let's have a conversation and a cup of coffee?
Yeah, well, what I have to say to that is likely not what they want to hear.
Right.
And the truth is that touching people is a non-negotiable in leadership. And if that's just not your strength, you've got some options. You can work to develop that, and it's a learnable skill. So it's a developable skill to be able to get more comfortable with the people relationships. But you can't opt out. And you can't hire somebody else to be the yin to your yang. All eyes are on the leader. And whether that's a leader by title or whether it's embracing this concept that if you have any influence over any volunteer in any organization, and likely that really broadens the definition for leadership, that touches many, many people. It's a non-negotiable to be able to reach in and touch the heart and to be able to find out what stirs inside that person that compels them to serve and to help them to get aligned with something that's going to be meaningful to them. It's a non-negotiable because it's an imperative for your organization. And if you say you really care about your organization and you care about your cause and your mission and your beneficiary, then ultimately you embrace that that's just part of what you do.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I completely agree with you. Just loving the fact that you're kind of unmovable on your thoughts and your principles, which was what makes this book a wonderful read. I want to talk to you about a word that sticks out in the book, and you're smiling because you know what the word is, I'm sure. Otherliness, which, you know, if you Google it, it belongs to you. You know,
It does. It does.
And it's kind of a fun word. It's fun to say. I catch myself after having read the book using the word. And for our viewers, I would love for you, in Barry's words, to talk about otherliness and the importance of that.
Yeah, otherliness, and I define it as placing the needs, wants, and desires of others ahead of our own. And it's so cool for me when I'm in front of groups of leaders and learners, and I'll drop the word. I'm like, otherliness. When you hear that word, what does it make you think of? And the amazing thing to me is consistently people can drum up a definition that is pretty close to what my textbook definition is. And then after that, I tell them, well, that's a really cool thing, but otherliness is not really a word. It's recognized in the Urban Dictionary, but it's not really a Merriam-Webster word yet. but it is
You're
a
getting it
concept.
there.
Yeah, that's one of my dreams.
You're getting it there.
Yeah, is to just take this concept of just placing the needs of others, and in a really simple way to say, it's not about me. It's not about us. As a leader, if we can place that individual and what's in their heart as the top priority ahead of a lot of other really important priorities, then we are really living the most basic principle of leadership. So it really drives us away from this command and control, old school, traditional way of thinking about how we manage people. But instead, it drives us to a place where we recognize that our job is to really care about people and to equip them and guide them and support them and inspire them in every step in their service journey.
You are very passionate about the material that you teach, that I'm clear that you live, even in just this conversation.
I try.
Yes, you're very passionate about it. Writing a book is technical. There is a process in writing a book, and I want to talk a little bit about that because a lot of our viewers are looking for the way that they wrote that book and what they were thinking when they put it together, and we kind of touched on that at the start of our talk today. But the process of writing a book that is motivation, education, and directive, which is kind of all of this, education being the key in that, because if you're reading this book and I'm going to say your language is different in this book. You speak your language in this book. Otherliness was a wonderful example of that you're not afraid in this book to say, this is how it is, this is why it works. Tell me about how you did research for this book, knowing that you were going to speak your language and you were going to speak your word at the end of that research, no matter what.
Yeah, so a great question. And I've been blessed with so many wonderful opportunities to work with leaders, both in the volunteer space and in the for-profit space. And I say wonderful leaders, meaning that I was able to learn a lot from them, and I'm one to pay attention. So what I learned from a lot of people is what to do, and what I learned from a few leaders is what not to do. And I had taken account of all of those along my journey. And my research really was much through my own life experiences and my professional experiences, but I didn't stop there. I knew I had a story that I wanted to share, but I did not believe that I would be espousing otherliness if I told it through my own voice. So I wrote the book in third-person voice. And what I did is I did extensive interviewing and surveying of a lot of other volunteers and leaders of volunteers. And out of those hundreds of people who I had an opportunity to be able to hear their story, I selected 30 of them. And so you'll hear 30 different voices in the book. And through their voice, they emphasize the learning principles that are really there for leaders to choose to embrace. And when I wrote the book, I wrote it from front cover to back cover. I wrote it in a linear fashion, and it followed many of the workshops, the agenda for the workshops that I had been doing for a few years prior to actually embarking on writing the book. But I tell readers, please do not dare attempt to read the book from cover to cover. It wasn't designed to be consumed that way. It can be, but it's not designed that way. We talk about how busy we are as people, and especially leaders, being overtaxed in many, many ways. And the last thing I want is for that book to be a burden on them. So there's not a section that's longer than 12 pages. In fact, many of the sections are only 2 or 3 pages, and they're written for you to be able to consume them in bite-sized nuggets, in much the way that we consume a lot of other content throughout our lives.
Yeah, it's definitely not a labor of reading. It's a fast read. The content is, and I'm going to say from my read, it was an easy grasp. I think that if this concept is foreign to your leadership style, that it may be 2 or 3 reads and then you kind of make it happen. But it is a very easy read with regard to the way that it's put together. I love that you call yourself a thought leader. And and in looking at some of the works that have been written about you, definitely seeing some of your conference material, you are a thought leader. You engage even your audience in this process. Worksheets, talks, questioning, 70 people in a room, and they're all talking about what he's trying to figure out. And it's fun to watch you speak on this topic. Tell me a little bit about some of the conference experiences that you've had that maybe shaped you or redirected you.
The learning environments where I was able to step in and even before writing the book, that they actually gave me the confidence to move forward and say, oh, maybe I got something here, because there was receptivity to these really simple concepts. And what I learned along my own journey is that there's nothing really difficult in there. There's maybe not even new, but I do see myself as a thought leader for one simple reason, because I think I offer something that's maybe a little bit different than the way most people who are in these roles are currently thinking. And that's what I discovered, is I see the aha moments happen on people's faces. I see them as they're pondering some of these thoughts, like, wow, you know what? I totally get that. I get what you're saying, but that's not the way I've been thinking about this up to this point. And to me, there's beauty in those moments. That's what's really exciting to me, is when I'm able to be a part of somebody embracing a different way of being able to approach their role as a leader, and really recognizing that they have a huge impact on the experience of others, maybe in a way in which they've never really pondered before.
And just going back to some of the things that are in your book, I think that the ripple effect of engaging this book, you may never realize. As a leader, you may never realize what the impact of engaging this kind of model has in an organization. And thinking about it from the volunteer standpoint, as you've been, as I'm sure many of our viewers have been. Thinking about it from the engagement standpoint as a volunteer, what a wonderful feeling for volunteers to know that a model such as this, engaging the hands, head, heart, feet, mind, ears, all those things of a leader, and empowering them, and then maybe making them a leader, what a wonderful place to be as a volunteer.
Yeah.
I would have to believe that as a volunteer, you would live there forever. Wherever you're volunteering, you're staying, if that were the case.
Yeah, and here's what I discovered, even as I just get in everyday chats with people about the book. And when I begin to say, oh yeah, as I volunteered, I had some different kinds of experiences. Most everybody who I speak to about that can relate to what I'm describing. So many of us who choose to serve, we likely have had similar moments where maybe what we chose to do didn't pan out the way that we thought it would. And to me, it just says that there's a need. There's a need in the marketplace, a need to be able to support leaders and to help them, because they really do make the difference. And engagement really happens one person at a time.
Thank you so much for joining us on Writer's Den today with author, writer, thought leader Barry Altland and his book, Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of Volunteers.